Welcome to episode 288 of the Help Me with HIPAA podcast. My name is David Sims of HIPAA for MSPs and Security First IT, and joining me is Donna Grindle of Carton. Good morning, Donna.
Good morning.
How are you?
Well, I'm doing better now. I'm getting excited about doing this show. So, that woke me up. Otherwise, I'd probably still be asleep.
Good. Yep. So today we have a special guest with us. We have John Miller, and he's been with us before. And he is with Seacrest Partners. We're going to be talking about cybersecurity policy trends. So talk about that insurance stuff.
Yes,
and if you're
it's
like
exciting.
me, and if you're like me, you're like, oh, insurance. So
hey, we're not all that boring now.
It's not boring. It's just kind of like, insurance.
It's complicated.
Yeah. So we'll get to that in just a minute, and we're definitely going to cut the announcement short, but we do want to remind everybody the HIPAA Boot Camp virtual edition is coming up February 23, 24, and 25. You better get in your seat quickly.
Yeah, we making all the updates for the changes in HIPAA for 2021. So if you're an alumni, hit us up. We'll give you a deal.
Right. Absolutely. So,
and it's all virtual.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to know more about that, go to thehipaabootcamp.com. All the information is there. Or you can email Donna. She'll tell you.
I get with this.
And with that, we'll dive in today to our topic. And John, tell everybody. I can't talk this morning. Tell everybody about yourself and your company.
Yeah, so I am an Atlanta native, and our firm is based here in Atlanta, though we have offices in multiple states throughout the Southeast. So the company was started in 2003, and we have been one of the fastest growing insurance and risk management firms in the country. We're now, I think, in the top 75-ish of firms in the country with about 45 million in revenue, a couple hundred employees. And we like to say we're humble, hungry, and smart. And, we try to attract intellectual capital to us to give good advice to our clients. And it's a lot easier if your clients are growing. You don't have to go out and sell as much. So we tend to attract high growth companies and, assist them with their insurance needs.
Cool. I like that intellectual capital.
Yeah.
So
he has great words. That's why I like having him on.
I know. It just lets me know.
We always learn new things to say.
Yeah. It just lets me know I'll never get a job there.
We're open to all temperaments, talents, and convictions. So.
There you go. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But just to make sure, because we always screw this part up, how do people get in touch with you guys if they're interested in learning more about your services and getting that intellectual capital?
Yeah, absolutely. So our direct dial, kind of the main office here, 678-424-6500. And we've got a website, sterlingseacrest.com.
There you go.
Website.
Awesome. So now we've done all the business. Let's get down and dirty, talking about insurance.
Yeah.
So our original plan here was to talk about the trends that we're seeing, like what you guys have seen with 2020 and the impact of all the cybersecurity and your thoughts on that and where you see us going. And then since then, we've got the recognized security practices thing coming through, and who knows by the time this comes out, what we will have. But let's let you give us a little roll on your thoughts on 2020 and what you saw and the impact on all the attacks that we've experienced.
Yeah, so it's been a rough year if you're an underwriter. You're making a promise on a sheet of paper to pay, and when those promises all have to be fulfilled all at the same time, it's pretty delicate seat to sit in. So the losses are mounting, and I'll give you some statistics on that. But the industry as a whole, from a cybersecurity or privacy, depending on how you kind of phraseology, is about $5 billion market, and the U.S. is by far the largest of those. And the expectation is we're going to grow about 20 to 30% each year, over the next few years. So boardrooms have become particularly attuned to cyber liability risk. It doesn't, you can't pick up the newspaper these days without having yet another, hack. And I know we're going to talk about SolarWinds in a second, but it is a real challenge from if you sit in the underwriter's seat. So just a little bit of data that might help everybody to kind of understand the average payment, and this is from the insurance industry, average payment in Q3 of this past year was $233,000. So when there is a claim, that's the average payment, and that's up about 31% from the previous quarter.
Wow.
So it's real dollars when you got to make payments on these things. So if you look at 2018 versus 2019, it actually fell a little bit in that year, but there are two components to insurance pricing. The first is severity. That is when we got to make a big payment, a solar winds kind of a payment. What's that dollar amount? But the second one is frequency. And so while claims fell a little bit in 2019 and then ticked back up in 2020, frequency's on the climb in a significant way. So per kind of the way we do it is per 1,000 policies. And so in 2018, that was 4.2. So 4.2 claims per 1,000 policies, okay? And in 2019, it bumped up to 5.6. We don't yet have the data for 2020, but the expectation is going to kick up again. So, kind of more throughput of claims results in higher dollars. And so we have both a frequency and a severity problem on this particular line.
Whoa. That's so when you say, a lot of people say, 8 to 5.2 or something along those lines. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a lot when you're saying that each one of those averages $230-something thousand.
Yeah.
So it's got to have a bigger impact, just a tiny little bit. Are you looking for it to be like a similar kind of jump or a bigger jump this year?
Well, I'm looking
prognostication.
I'm looking for it to be a bigger jump because of this factor. So the bad guys are getting smart. So the more uptake of insurance there is, the more they can demand from a ransomware standpoint. Okay.
Yeah.
And so whereas it used to be, the ransomwares maybe 10 years ago were $15,000, $5,000, that kind of stuff. Now all of a sudden it is not uncommon at all for us to get 7-figure ransom demands. And so, with the adoption of insurance comes the knowledge. And by the way, if they're in our system, you don't think they're in our risk manager's email as well, looking up exactly how much we have in insurance limits associated with this loss. And so, it's funny. All of a sudden you get a demand and it's exactly the insurance limits that are available. So,
yeah. But they weren't in our system at all.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah, it's absolutely terrifying to understand just how much they're able to get in there and get around these days. And I don't think people really understand it. And, where we're going there, though, the FBI and everybody's like, don't pay because it's only getting worse because we're paying. I mean, they're making $1 billion or more on some of these things. But it's a fine line for those who are in that position. I know years ago we talked, like before everything became what it is now, when you and I first started hanging out, and it was easier to pay. And I'm like, yeah, but OCR's changing that. That was one of our first conversations. It's still easier to pay, but there are repercussions no matter what you do. Are you still kind of seeing that payment is the route everybody's taking no matter what?
Not no matter what. So, I mean, if you can get back up and running and you do have segregated data, and there's kind of no harm, no foul around your operations, then people aren't paying, right? But you still have circumstances where you don't have a backup that is recoverable, and you're forced to pay. I mean, otherwise you're going to shut your business down. And
right.
So, to some extent, it's kind of the adage of, well, if the insurance is paying it, that's what we bought the insurance for. Let them pay it. Right? But do you treat? I give a great example. Like when you have something happen at your house or a little ding to your car, do you go and automatically turn that in insurance? No, you kind of think to yourself, well, gosh, if I ding this on my insurance, then my rates are going to go up. And
right.
So you kind of keep that close. But there is a tipping point at which, if the tree falls on your house, you're turning in your insurance, right? And but basically what's happening is the tipping point's going up a little bit every year. But so are the demands from the bad guys. And so, it's a natural evolutionary process. And basically the market is evolving as those demands are going up to meet those demands on behalf of the customers.
So who are the ones that end up having to pay? What do you find? This is a great segue into the things that you are seeing we have to fix to keep people from being in that position. Because, you know, in 2019, it was big news that practices, they just shut down.
Yeah.
You know, there's a couple of them made big news. Now, if they're doing it, they're keeping it quiet because I think they've realized you shouldn't be announcing those kinds of things. But, you know, are there consistent issues that put people in a position where they have to pay and then they're struggling, you know, because we often hear about you got to pay 2 or 3 times and all of those kind of things. Is there that tipping point you were talking about of where you get into that position where you have no choice?
Yeah, I mean, I think every circumstance is different in terms of the impact to the business. So keep in mind that the cyber insurers are also paying for business interruption insurance.
Right.
And so to the extent that the business is going to be down for a period of time, kind of they have the risk either way. And so then they're going to do what is expedient for them. What's the least cost? Is it better to hold out on the bad guys and not pay them, but suffer the business income loss, or is it better to go ahead and pay them? You know, nowadays they've had so much interaction, they kind of know who are the trusted hackers and who are the untrusted hackers. And so if they run into a trusted hacker and somebody they've done business with before, then it's like, all right, hey, we're going to pay you, and they got a pretty good feel that, you know, they're going to get their data back. So that's it's a weird way, but, you know, actually you kind of gain credibility by being a trusted, you know, party, you know, to actually deliver on the data when the demand is met. So
we're honest criminals is
that's
what we call it.
It's funny to me as I read through the claim files and talk to my insureds about it. You know, there's almost like this social justice where, you know, we're here to make you better kind of thing. But, oh, by the way, we also want our money.
Yeah, we're testing your security for you. That's the whole thing.
That's right.
And so, David, I know that you're dying to get into the topic of, you know, what should we implement to make it better, and the supply chain, which is something that David and I we've been harping about the supply chain for years. And I think everybody's getting a harsh awakening to what that means.
One of the things that I'm starting to see from my clients is they're coming to me and they're saying, I need this audit form filled out for my insurance. I'm seeing that a lot. And so, which tells me that the insurance companies are wanting some type of assurance that that company is taking steps to protect data, follow governance and things like that. So speak to that on your side of the table, John. How is that looking? Because I didn't see that a whole lot in years past. It was some, but now I'm seeing a good bit now.
Yeah. So like every other line of business that is happening in the insurance business, we're always a few years behind the trends and what's going on. And so if I go back 5 years ago, there might have been 3 or 4 questions on an application, and the CFO or the practice administrator on the healthcare side, you know, could largely answer those questions. Kind of, yeah, you know, we have a backup system. Yeah, we use a firewall. You know, kind of simple stuff. Nowadays, you're exactly right. The questionnaires we're getting are multiple pages. And get down to a granularity where that C-level suite can't answer those questions. They're having to go to either internal IT resources or external IT resources to even be able to understand the question, much less answer it. And so that creates a higher level of compliance risk for the insured too. Because keep in mind, when you're signing that application, you are making a statement that you are doing those various things on there. And if you're not, that's fraud. That's insurance fraud. And so they got not only the ability to deny the claim, but also prosecute you for insurance fraud. Okay. So and you know, that's felony kind of stuff. And so there's a tremendous amount of scrutiny on the level of information that's being asked today, and ensuring that indeed the companies are following through on it. So
yeah, which is kind of interesting, because if Donna and I ask somebody, are you doing these things and how are you doing them? Sometimes you get, well, I can't tell you because that's a secret. But, you know, the insurance application comes in and it's asking the same kind of questions. And then all of a sudden, oh, we can answer these.
That's
but,
right.
But it is sometimes difficult. I've even had some of them where I've had to call the insurance provider and say, I need more clarification on this question, because even I couldn't understand exactly what they were asking me for. But it's good though that and I said this years ago, that it's going to take something else other than compliance that's going to push businesses or medical practices into complying with these types of cybersecurity frameworks.
Yeah.
And so we're starting to see that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things is the liability risk. So I don't know whether y'all have covered on your podcast the recent Supreme Court decision in our state in Georgia around the privacy breach and the fact that basically the Supreme Court came out and said, look, you don't actually have to have damages to the parties whose data is breached in order to proceed with litigation against the party that did the breach. And that ought to wake everybody up that, you know, if we can have liability in the absence of damages, and that's what the court said, that's a big issue, because, by the way, that doesn't just apply to healthcare; it applies to everybody,
Right.
you know, throughout the at least in Georgia. And I think that's woken some boards of directors up. Certainly, for the first time in a long time, or ever really. In the last 18 months, as I've gone to some board meetings where we're talking about risk management, we're talking about cyber liability, I'm having counsel show up from law firms. So the kind of IT security counsel subspecialist for the various law firm is showing up at that board meeting in consultation, in addition to me as an insurance provider and, you know, whoever their IT security executives are, because boards of directors are you know, really focusing on this issue now. So
Yeah. Won't be long before they'll start adding therapists in those meetings.
yeah, well, we need those. Either that or Jack Daniels. One of them.
Yeah, one way or the other, it's gonna have to, you know, have a little break. And I tell you that one of the things that I don't know, maybe back in the beginning of the podcast, we put on our recommendations and have for years of get the board involved. Make sure you put cybersecurity, privacy and security, whatever works on the agenda at every meeting. And even if you just stop in and say, hey, we've had some positives, it's important that you discuss it at every meeting. And I think now, you know, because it became a green issue, then that's forcing it to happen. But you're seeing it happen. That's exciting to us, because that is how the visibility, you have to have leadership involved to make change. And if they're just like, yeah, check that box, that's the way the entire company runs.
Well, you know, one of the things that happens in litigation and as a tactic of plaintiff attorneys is they want to know, is there a systemic issue where this company just turned a blind eye to cybersecurity? If you have a breach. And so don't think for a minute that, you know, they kind of get started at the rank. So as they do deposition in order, they're starting with the IT person at kind of the desk jockey, for lack of a better term. And then they're going to the IT manager, and then they're going to the CFO, and then they're going to the CEO, and then they're going to the chairman, right? And so as those people up the ladder start to participate in depositions, and they get started, have to answer questions about, you know, what did you do, you know, in your meetings? What did you do to address this particular issue that harmed my client? And then much less, those CFOs and CEOs have to sit on the stand and answer those very questions. Believe me, they get real serious real quick, because every executive, has to answer, for the totality of the operations. And to the extent you've got a bunch of people harmed, and what scared me to death is, I don't even have a bunch of people harmed. Like, these people we had a privacy breach. Nobody suffered any harm, yet I'm still going to be shelling dollars out of it. That blows my mind.
That's the hard part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and the flip side of that is something that we've always had to warn people about is, if nothing happens now, just know they hang on to this stuff. They wait until all of that stuff passes before they do anything. And I think that's the hard part, is that they are working the system on the other side of it. The criminals are working the system so hard. And the best thing to do is just not go down that path. Because once you go down that path, nothing looks good for a long time, as far as what my experience is. I mean, I don't see these things getting resolved quickly, I guess is what I'm getting at. Do you?
No, they're not going to. So, you know, we talked a minute ago about or before we got on the podcast about defensibility, right? And all the different things that you need to enable your defense attorney to have to portray to the jury that you've taken this seriously, and that you're kind of best in class, if you will, relative to defending these matters, or relative to protecting the data. And so there's kind of two levels of that. There's, did I meet the minimum threshold that the government requires? And then secondarily, did I go over and above that and do things that maybe even they didn't require? And I would tell you that the more I learn about this topic as I advise clients, the more I'm telling people, look, you got to be out ahead of this. You got to be way in advance of what just the minimum requirements are. Because when we're in litigation, we need to be able to say you did it better, faster, more thoroughly than anybody else. That's going to play well to juries. And so I think
Absolutely.
people are thinking about that. So,
well, you look at just this year, earlier this year, the director of OCR said HIPAA is the floor. If all you're doing is HIPAA, and that's what unfortunately a lot of people think they have to do, and that's all they're going to do, you are doing the bare minimum, and we're having trouble getting people to do the bare minimum.
right.
Yeah. Imagine sitting on the stand and going, I want to testify I did the absolute bare minimum.
It's not a good place to be, for sure.
No, I'm good. I did the bare minimum. I did HIPAA.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges, though, guys, is the standard of care. Think of it this way. So like, let's say you were an engineer, or you're a doctor, or you're an accountant, right? All of those professionals have to meet the standard of care, right? And the standard of care changes with regard to liability claims. So if you're a physician, let's just use them as an example, and you're in New York City with all the resources and all the imaging and all that, your standard of care is higher than if you're in rural New Mexico with very little in the way of resources. Well, that same concept applies to IT professionals, okay? Both internal and external. So the more sophisticated you are, the more resources you have, the more that it's expected of you by society, right? And the standard of care gets lifted. So not only is regulation lifting the standard of care, but also additional resources. If you're Georgia Pacific, for example, and you got a big budget, like there's an expectation that you're doing everything you can to protect consumer information, versus if you're the little bitty practice that doesn't have much of a budget, it's granular at that level. But what I would tell you is, over time, the standard of care is going up for everybody.
Yeah, like the Equifax folks, everybody kind of, and then that one guy is responsible for all those people. That one guy they tossed under the bus on the stand.
If you believe that.
Yeah. I mean, there's no way.
You can do like Trump and point to China or Russia or whatever, but that don't get you so far.
Yeah, I know. You can't blame somebody else.
Well, John,
and that's the thing. Go ahead, David.
You mentioned budgets, and this is something that is hard to find, and every once in a blue moon I hear somebody mention it. But what I've always tried to look for is, how can I communicate to a business what their investment should be in cybersecurity? And I've heard things, people say, well, somewhere between 3 and 5% of your gross number should be kind of what you're investing in there. Do you guys have anything that kind of suggests a range?
That sounds about right to me. I don't know that if I have anything scientific on that where that's been studied, but that sounds in the ballpark of what ought to be expected. I don't have any hard data around it should be X percent of your budget. But that doesn't sound too far off.
Okay.
Well, and we've been encouraging people to just have that as a budget line item instead of rolling technology and security and everything into overhead, office expenses. No matter how small you are, you need to be tracking that you're doing these things, and know that having antivirus does not mean you have cybersecurity.
No, that's right.
Yeah, I even suggest that you make cybersecurity a separate line item from IT.
It's supposed to be, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's encouraged throughout it's one of the indicators that a lot of folks look at to see if you're taking it seriously. If you actually have those budget line items, then you can show you're doing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about supply chain and solar winds.
Yeah, so you talk about a shock wave. So put yourself well, let me tell you a quick little story because y'all like stories.
Oh yeah.
So remember when Enron went down?
Oh yeah.
So there was one guy that wrote the surety bonds for Enron. And the story goes that he got fired while on the golf course. Like they said, don't even bother coming back. Okay. And so when it all hits the fan, somebody in these insurance companies gets fired. Okay.
Right.
Well, nobody wants to be that person. The challenge you got now, though, is it's not individual underwriting decisions relative to cybersecurity risk in individual circumstances, individual companies.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a solar winds thing happen, it's not even the head of the cybersecurity underwriting team that gets fired. It's the dang CEO of the company that said,
Right.
why did you get us into cyber risk to begin with? Right?
Right,
Why are we
right.
paying property and automobile and those kinds of things? Because the systemic nature of those supply chain claims is you basically put up all your policy limits for everything you wrote. Well, you got reinsurance for that, but your reinsurer, when you go to renew your reinsurance, is going to say, yeah, we just paid whatever, $30 million. Your reinsurance is now $25 million. Okay. So they get their money back in short order.
Right.
And what I would tell you is the solar winds event and the systemic nature of all the different people that were affected, from McDonald's, on up to the Treasury Department, has made a lot of insurance executives pause. Hey, is this a business we really want to be in? Because if this can happen at the supply chain, and we ultimately got to pay these claims, like what we really ought to be underwriting the supply chain, right? But we really don't have the wherewithal to do that, because if this can happen to them and happen to Microsoft, et cetera, yet we're the ones footing the bill for it, because in a normal circumstance in supply chain world, let's take this for example. Let's say we have a F-250s, right? And all of a sudden the gas cap on the F-250s is faulty and they start blowing up around the world, okay? Well, the individual dealer that is selling that F-250 is going to be named in the lawsuit, but what's he going to do? He's going to turn around and party Ford Motor Company into it, okay?
Right.
The inability to do that in this circumstance is a challenge. You were going to try to subrogate the claim back against the supply chain, but then they're going to say, oh, these are independent acts. And there are all kind of these defenses that are going to be thrown up. And so the underwriters got their hands full when the supply chain, gets hacked.
Yeah, you kind of backed in a corner there, aren't you? There's no way out. And that's my concern, is that you guys are going to be pushed and pushed and pushed to the point that fewer and fewer people are willing to back these claims. And then, that's supply and demand is going to kick in. And so we keep having that cycle going on. And I know that in today's world, like even for us, I am surprised that more people don't require coverage in the supply chain. Now, some of our contracts, and what we do is nothing like what David does. And I'm happy about that, David. So, but even with mine, a 1 million, 3 million, just for advice I might give, we have that. But for David and his business, when you're looking at, you're an individual in the supply chain and you want to do the right thing, how do we decide what kind of coverage helps us take care of our clients? Because we got a twofold problem. You got people that aren't taking care of their clients, and the people that really want to do the right thing. What do those people that want to do the right thing do?
Well, they put requirements on their suppliers to carry certain amounts of insurance. And by the way, this is happening. The inverse of this is happening in hospitals today. So I just this last week was dealing with a client who's going to be touching some PHI in a hospital system, is a technology involved client. And the hospital said, well, look, you can come into our facility. We're happy to have you. We're happy to contract with you, et cetera. You got to have $25 million of cyber liability insurance.
Whoa.
Well, we can maybe get it. I don't know. We're trying.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, so as the problem is there's a capacity challenge, right? As those limits start to get higher and higher and higher, there's only so many people that are willing to put their balance sheet at risk for that, right?
Right.
And so it's interesting. I had one underwriter. I say underwriter. He's the head of one of the largest. He's a name brand CEO. Let me say it that way. So you see his advertisements on PGA Tour, Players, Chest, and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, I had a conversation with him, and it was very interesting. He said, we don't insure war risk because you can't underwrite for it. He said, we don't insure pandemic risk. That's been a big topic in our world for the last 6 or 8 months, is everybody wants their business interruption policies to cover the COVID claims, and you can't insure against that. It would bankrupt the insurance industry in 3 months.
Right.
He said, gosh, if you think about foreign state actors, Russia, China, North Korea, that have people that are getting into our supply chain, he says, that's pretty close to an act of war. He said, because we can't assume all that liability as an industry. And so there may be a tipping point here where that becomes to reality. I don't think it will. I think he's maybe playing a little doomsday. I think there is enough capacity. If you can get a return on it from a shareholder perspective, people will continue to put their capital at risk, right?
Right.
And to date, the cyber liability insurers made a lot of money, even though last year wasn't so great.
Yeah.
Their answer is, well, we're just going to up premium a little more and a little more and a little more. And then what happens? That then flows down into the cost of the products, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we as society end up paying those losses. So I think in the end, the insurance industry is going to be able to provide the solution. But in the near term, when you get a hospital requiring, and you're a little technology company, you got to get $25 million of limits. And heck, it's double what your profit margin was going to be on the deal. You're probably not going to be able to do that deal.
How you think of that, David? You got 25 mil?
Mm-mm.
No.
Mm-mm. No, I have to borrow from you, Donna.
Yeah, right. I'll just stroke a check tomorrow.
She just backed that truck up, that Brinks truck she's got.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah. Now I'll write a check in a heartbeat.
I know. I'll write the check. Just don't do anything with it. It's pretty. It's artwork. So in this whole supply chain concept, I think, for me, when I'm advising my clients and I tell them, you need to do a better job vetting your vendors. Mm-hmm. So, the BAA is what a lot of folks are like, well, they signed a BAA. That's all I need to do. I was like, again, bare minimum. So what kinds of things in contracting are you seeing or we should be prepared for coming as far as, if I'm contracting down, if I'm upstream or downstream?
Yeah. So this is an area that many companies are not attuned to. And it's something that I know you've been preaching, I've been preaching for a long time. So the teeth of a contract, there are two key components. The first is the indemnity obligation to stand between you and the plaintiff relative to the negligence of that party. And it doesn't matter whether you're an IT consultant providing services, whether you're a software vendor providing services, a IT platform, cloud-based services, et cetera. There needs to be an indemnity provision in every contract. Now, having said that, Microsoft or Apple, when you go to them and say, I want an indemnity, they say, yeah, whatever. You want our software? Here's what it costs.
Yeah.
and they have the bandwidth, they have the might to do that, right? But there are many, many people that you can get to sign an indemnity agreement. So then the question is, all right, so now they're obligating the company to stand between you and the plaintiff. But what good is that if the company is bankrupt, right? So that's where insurance steps in. And so it's a two-part compact in the agreement, the indemnity first, and then insurance limits backing up that indemnity. And then you got to evaluate, what's our total exposure. So we've got some great tools around, tell me how many records you have, tell me how many employees you have, and I can, within $500,000, I can get you what the maximum claim we've ever seen for your business is, or what the average
Wow.
claim is. Okay. And so, it may not be for a hospital system, probably is $25 million. That's probably what they're asking for. For a physician practice or for a small manufacturer or whatever, it might be 3 million, 5 million. And so that analysis can be done on the risk management side. And then you put that back into the contract. What's not happening is too many times the people are just signing the contract and there's no indemnity in there. There's no insurance requirements in there. Then the event happens and they come to me and say, well, what are we going to do? And I'm like, well, you got $1 million insurance. This is a $3 million event. You're on the hook for the next 2. Well, I'm going to sue them. Okay. Well, good luck.
I know.
It'd be a lot better if you had an indemnity insurance policy in place. So.
Yeah, so building that in, it's not a requirement in a business associate agreement. And it is a requirement in a business associate agreement to make sure your downstream is under a business associate agreement. But again, I see that tail isn't leading as far away. There's a lot of times where, you're 2 or 3 down, you don't even realize you got a healthcare client going on. And I see that happening. Are you seeing the same thing, that the further away you get from the original client, particularly with MSPs, I would believe that.
Yeah, no, there's no doubt. And so then, can you put language in the contract that says your sub of your sub of your sub needs to maintain the same insurance limits that you have? Absolutely, you can. And so, you asked me a decade ago, I had 0 attorneys on my staff. Today I have 4.
Whoa.
That's exactly what they're doing, is assisting our clients. And if anybody has any needs for advice around kind of how we go about doing that and how to think about that strategically, that's exactly the service we provide to people.
Yeah, I love the fact that if anything along those lines, I just call somebody I know in your firm and they're going to hook me up, particularly that lady that won't let her get on camera. I heard her laugh though.
Oh, yeah.
But I have seen you work at conferences where you're speaking, and you're constantly, you're like us. We're doing this because we believe in what we're doing, and yes, we make money at it, and I want to make a good living, but we really want to get people on the path that protects the patient information in the first place, so they're not having to come and get all of these things. So we're seeing, first of all, we've got the new amendment to high tech with the recognized security practices, which we're really excited about. We also have the information blocking stuff coming. We also have the changes to the privacy rule, which, is reducing the amount of time to get patient records to them, and along with the information blocking. So there's all these things coming that are going to be potential areas to either improve or fail. And when I'm looking at all of those things and I'm saying, well, let's go down the path of let's do the recognized security practices. And if you're going to go do those, no, they're not required. But the law is very clear. These are not required to follow, and you will not be penalized if you don't follow them. But when you and your 4 attorneys see that amendment, what are you going to be advising your clients?
Well, you certainly want to do everything within your budget and capabilities that you can do, right? So, you can, just like I tell my clients all the time, look, I can make insurance poor, right? We can cover all kinds of different things. You get a bunch of premium in there, but you're not going to be able to operate a business, right? So
Right.
There's always levels of appropriateness, I guess, in that. But when you're hiring a third party to provide services, and you have a choice between company A, company B, and company C, and you tell all of them, look, I want indemnity, and company C is willing to do that and pay $2,000 more, absolutely, you take company C. So not that's a just a general way of general way that people need to act. General contractors have been dealing with this for decades, and you think about a subcontractor who doesn't want to take on any liability, and they say, all right, I'm going to hire you. You're going to put this in every one. Oh, we're not agreeable. Okay, well, I'm going to go hire this other subcontractor. And eventually, everybody kind of gets on board and says, well, this is something I got to do if I'm going to be in the business. And I would tell you, the more demand there is from our customers for their vendors to do that, the more there's going to be adoption over time. So.
Well, we're excited to see where this goes, because we felt, strongly that this is an important step to get above that minimum of check the box, HIPAA made easy, as we say.
Yeah.
And going down that path, we were right away asking you if we did these, our clients are already doing these. Does this help the premiums or hurt the premiums? And we were very educated on that. So I'd like for you to share that with everybody else, because we were not educated before.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Some of the carriers have begun to require dual authentication, or they're going to charge more in premium. They require segregated backup, or they're charged more in premium. It's very rare, though, that the carrier will give you a premium discount attributable to you having certain things in place. That is, there's an expectation that you're going to be doing certainly all the minimum requirements. And frankly, nowadays, particularly in healthcare, there's an expectation you're going to go above the minimum, right? And so it's not, I was sharing with you earlier, it's not like, well, if I go get my 16-year-old to do a driving class, there's a 10% discount to my premium. Like, it doesn't work that way in buying commercial and cyber liability insurance. But I would tell you that if you aren't out ahead of it, you're going to pay more than you would have, but there's not necessarily a premium discount associated with particular compliance things.
I think it's the backwards then, based on what you're saying. What I'm thinking is, it's not that you'll get a discount for doing it, but you may pay more for not doing it.
That's correct. Yeah.
But what if you're paying more for not doing it and then you start doing it?
So relative to this one carrier that requires two-factor and segregated backup, they actually will put the discount back up. They will reduce your premium back down, right?
There you go. Yay.
But they don't file discounts based on compliance with either certain technology. I had a number of years ago when kind of firewalls were just, I had a physician come to me and say, well, now I have a firewall. I understand I get my 5% discount. And I'm like, no, it doesn't work that way. So there's an expectation that everybody has a firewall.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should have had that. I'm glad you never told me. Bye.
That's right.
Which is another point that you made, that we've said this over and over, and people aren't getting it. And as these requirements, the questionnaires and the applications become more complex, they're going to need to pay attention. We both know that people have said, yes, we've done a security risk analysis according to HIPAA, and they honestly may believe they have, because somebody honestly believed that's what they were doing, but they didn't do it.
Right.
And there's that case. And then there's some who are like, yeah. They don't even read them. They're just like, yeah, we do this. Yeah, we do this. What happens up in there? What do we call that?
Well, that's a good question. So technically that's fraud, and the insurer has every right to deny the claim. Okay. Does that happen all that often? No, it doesn't happen all that often. But what does happen is, if you are a prominent business and you make a false representation on an application, you might get one bite of that apple, and then you're not going to be insured by that insurance company the next year, and they'll non-renew you. And then once you're non-renewed, you get to pay half again, double, triple, because you have a non-renewal on your record. At that point. And so, worst case is if you falsify it, you got potential state claims for fraud, by the way, against the person that signed the application. So right. It's a real liability. Yeah. But I don't see that as much as I see carriers, once they find out that you weren't forthright with them, just saying, you know what, we're done with you, and you end up in the alternative markets and pay double, triple.
So either way you do it, you're better off doing it right, because that's what you're supposed to be filling out the form for. And I've seen the forms change just in the last 6 years, going from never mentioning HIPAA at all to asking at least about the risk analysis, and now requiring a whole lot more detail about what your cybersecurity programs are. That's the ones I've seen. Is that like just a few, you know, picks of the crop, or is that an industry standard that you see happening?
It's becoming an industry standard. So what's interesting is that the folks that have been around a while in this space are all doing that, and you're doing it relatively uniformly.
Right.
New market entrants, oftentimes because they want to make it easy to do business, will water down. And it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because
Right.
what do I do as a broker? If I'm going to have the nth degree on one hand and I get the 3-question one on the other hand, and I know my client may or may not be up to snuff, I'm going the 3-question route. Right? And so there's a little bit of a moral hazard there, I guess is the right answer. But I would tell you that pretty quickly, even the new market entrants get burned a couple of times, and then they're like, all right, and I need to start asking these questions too.
So are you seeing them standardize at all? Like David was mentioning, the forms he's starting to see now, where, because one of the problems that I have when I'm helping business associates, they're doing the work and they want to complete these forms. They understand the importance of it, but these things are not like 5 minutes and it's done. So is there some sort of standard? You know, I work with some folks that are doing, that work with universities, and there's a standard in universities and all these different layers. And granted, it's not easy, but at least you can do that and then be prepared. Is there a way we can do that in healthcare? I'll just go with that.
Yeah, so some of the larger brokers have begun to do that with tailored solutions with particular carriers, because it does become complex both in the application process and in the policy form process.
Right.
So taking a bigger picture of the industry as a whole, there is very little standardization, and I don't see it becoming standardized in the near term. You know, if I think about an automobile policy, for example, if I pick up AIG, Chubb, Liberty Mutual, Travelers, Hanover's automobile policies, they're 99% going to read exactly the same.
Right.
Okay? That is not the way cyber liability insurance is, because it's still an evolving marketplace, and the risk is not, we don't have decades upon decades of loss experience. Every cyber liability policy has probably about 50% in common, but there's another 50% that are varying terms and conditions, and every application, it reads differently. And unfortunately, that makes our life a lot more complicated and our clients' life a lot more complicated.
Well, one of the things that we're looking at doing is utilizing the health information, cybersecurity, supply chain, I don't know, but it's a standard that was released. Similar group, just a different part than the 405D committee that does HICCUP, along those same lines, and trying to find a way that we could say, here, this is a statement of what we're following in this framework, because there's all these folks are doing these, you know, these companies are coming out saying, well, we'll do the vetting. And then every one of them does it different. So having something, because this is becoming, you know, David gives me a hard time because he has to go through and answer ours. And I know, but we try to make ours, it's all online, yes or no. If something looks weird, we're going to ask you. But these larger groups, they're just buying that service and then having, you know, there's somebody that goes through, and I'm on all these calls now helping business associates. Okay, yeah, they work with me. This is what we do, and all of this to get past some of the barriers on these questionnaires.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the dangers I see to them too is if I lacked integrity and I had a client send me one of those questionnaires and it said, are you doing these security practices? And I knew that I should be doing them for my client, but they're asking me to answer the question for them. So if I didn't have integrity, I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm doing that.
Right.
But they're putting their name on it, not me.
That's right.
So that's something to be very concerned about.
It is. I don't, it will eventually become relatively uniform, but we're at least a decade away from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to remember sometimes just how young this market is. I mean, when do you first remember doing cyber coverage, getting involved in that?
That's actually an interesting question. So I was doing a presentation last year, right before COVID. So about 12, 13 months ago. And I was talking to an audience where I had multi generations, and I realized that some of the people in the audience were not born when HIPAA was passed.
Oh yeah, yeah, I do that all the time.
It dawned on me, oh my gosh, So I'm sorry, I forgot the question.
Oh no, when did you do your first cyber coverage?
Oh yeah. So it was the year that Hillary Care was in vogue. So what was that? 95, I guess it was. Was when Hillary
So right before 96, when so that
Yep.
that is and I don't recall it being a regular topic of discussion until maybe around the time HIPAA actually became effective. I think that's the first time you really started hearing about it. But again, I mean, we're talking a very short period of time in the big picture. But well, it's like for a lot of people, when we say the security rule hasn't changed at all since 2005, and then to put that in perspective, that was before the iPhone came out.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Very first one.
Yep.
Well, I've had some local carriers that just 5 years ago I went to and asked about cyber liability, and they were like, we don't do that. We don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
And then now you see advertisements everywhere they're doing. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, those now we know those are the ones with the easy questionnaire, David. Go on and get.
I know.
But that's like they always say that there are two kind of companies out there: the people who've been hacked know it, and the people who've been hacked don't know it.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, that brings me to a question. You may or may not be here to touch on this, but I've seen more and more IT companies that are saying, use our services and we'll provide you with $100,000 cyber liability policy. How does that work? Because to me, that I don't know, something about that just kind of makes me look at it sideways.
Yeah. It seems hinky.
It's a little bit of fox garden hen house going on there. So the answer is you can get an insurer to put a program together as long as you're willing to bring volume to them, right? And so what they're doing is they're just paying a couple $100, so maybe a couple $1,000 per client to wrap their services into a cyber liability policy that they're buying on behalf of their clients. And then of course they're just marking the client's cost up, to account for that. So it's gimmicky, is what I would say. And if any customer that is relying upon that as their sole defense,
right?
Probably hasn't kind of thought through the real risk that they have. I would want an independent party being my insurer, because it may well be the very person that's selling this to you that is the proximate cause of the issue, and I wouldn't want the insurance to flow through them as well. So
it's good, very good point. And I think I've only had somebody ask me once, do you provide coverage? And I'm like, no.
Why would I?
I know. I'm like, you don't want that from me,
no.
And I think that the way I looked at him so incredulously really made him go, oh, maybe I don't want that from that other vendor I'm comparing. All right. So John, what else do you have? We have had a lot of your time, and I know it's quite valuable. So what else would you like us to make sure we start getting the word out about the things to consider, the things to be aware of, the actions we need to take moving forward to better protect all of us from the level of liability that you see that we're facing right now?
The one thing that I've had good experience with clients in doing is to go ahead and do some tabletop exercises. And we lead some of those. We have some resources that lead some of those, and put yourself, if you've been an organization that has not yet had a breach, put yourself in the position of having a breach. And what are we going to do? how are we going to, deal with this? I've learned maybe the hard way with some people that have had some very significant breaches, that you kind of have to learn on the fly. And so I know it takes time and I know it takes energy, but I'm highly encouraging folks to do some tabletop exercises and to think through some of the strategic plays that, the biggest one of them, in my view, is the PRP. So if you think about, if I'm a board member, what I'm most concerned about is the brand hit that my organization takes in the event that we have a site, because it's a loss of trust, right? People place their data with you and say it is a loss of trust. And so particularly thinking through the PR aspects, the messaging, all that kind of stuff on the front end, I think, bodes well. We do a lot of private school work around the Southeast, and we do that with private schools. Rather, think of the example where you have a big cheating scandal at a school, or you have some kind of sexual assault, thing within your student base. Like, you don't want to be learning what you're going to say to the public while it's happening, right?
Right.
Same thing in cyber liability breaches for any company. You want to go ahead and have some things on the shelf, send the right message, rooted in your mission statement, and so that you can assure the public that number one, you take it seriously. Playing the victim doesn't work with the public. Okay.
Yeah.
So being forthright about what you're going to do, and that you take it seriously, and rerouting it in your mission, I think is a critical step for folks these days.
Yeah, maybe it's it's in our boot camp to do these incident. Most people tell you, do you have an incident response plan? And their answer is always, we have a backup and we have the breach policy to send the letter.
Yeah.
If you're lucky.
Do I need to talk about the backup? So, John, I had a conversation with a prospect earlier this week, and I said, and it's a small construction firm, and they said, I said, do you need backup services? And they're like, no, we already have backup through Carbonite. And I said, okay, great. So have you tested it? And they're like, well, we never had an opportunity to need it. I'm like, okay, but have you tested it? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, have you tried to recover any data from it? And they're like, no. I'm like, so you don't know if it works. You're just paying for it. And I got nothing, like silence.
Yeah.
Hey, blind faith is a great thing. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. I like to tell people, look, your backups may work, but the recovery of your backups may not. You need to know that.
David always points out, when you're getting a solution, you're not buying backup, you're buying recovery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's a big piece of that whole thing. But when it comes to actually understanding the reputational impact, because healthcare gets hit hard if they're not prepared to handle the message properly. And it is shocking to people when we tell them you have to plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine, maybe that's what we need to do, because we do a lot of, here's your base plan, and then you have a playbook for all of these other situations, and let's do a tabletop review. And there's tons of different tabletop exercises that you can pull from. They're freely available. But maybe what we need to do is just start offering that to get people to understand what you need to do. Because you're right, that's where they really get it. So, you know what? If you think you're good to go, let's just do one of these.
Yeah, I mean, it's either that or bring the defense attorneys that are defending these privacy breach claims in, and let them just kind of role play Mr. CEO, when you address your cyber liability plan over the last 12 months in your board meeting, how did that go? And the guy sits there and goes, well, what are you talking about? Right? And you just start piling on, and all of a sudden they kind of get it. Oh gosh, this is actually a duty of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I certainly appreciate your time always, my friend.
I enjoy being with y'all. It's a fun venue. I've been looking forward to this, so I'm glad to do it.
Well, as things progress, that we'll get you back. I mean, our plan was obviously to get you back sooner in 2020, but I said to a group yesterday, is everybody partying like it's 2022 yet? Because this is not looking, great so far. But clearly, to basically summarize, I guess, where we are it's time to step it up. It's time to take this and put it in the boardroom, put it in the meetings, all the things we've been preaching. Go back and listen to those and talk to a guy like John, because he's out there. He's seeing what happens. Go ahead and ask him questions. And this guy, he'll answer the questions. So he gave you how to get in touch with his firm. And I think that it's absolutely essential today that you're making business decisions based on the actual risk you're facing. And I think the thing that's really missing is that people don't understand the risk, and that have them do an incident response tabletop is eye-opening. I am sure you've seen some people I know we've seen people in our boot camp go, we actually have one lady who said, I don't think I've been doing this for years. I'm not too worried about it. I think we were 2 hours in and she threw her pen down and said, well, I've been doing this wrong for 10 years. So it's definitely a thing that I think everyone can learn from talking to people that are outside the system, looking in and seeing what's happening. So I encourage everybody, if you don't have a guy like John, give him a call.
Yeah,
And,
what I would say to everybody is, any friend of David, any friend of Donna's is a friend of mine. So, even if you've got a long-term insurance relationship and it's your brother-in-law or sister-in-law or whatever, that's your insurance agent, you just need some insight, feel free to call us. We're here to help and happy to help.
yeah. And I can attest to that. That is absolutely the case, folks. And I know that they've always been helpful to us, and we appreciate all that you guys do. And we're looking forward to, doing a little bit more, because I like hanging out with you too.
That's
And but if there's anything at all that we can say about HIPAA, is remember, HIPAA's the floor.
Mhm.
And as John's pointed out, standard of care is rising. So listen in to a few more of the podcasts we've been doing, and pay attention, because this is the time to get in. We've talked about the 12-month thing with the new amendment. We've talked about all these reasons. Every day you're not doing it is a day you're getting yourself in trouble.
And paying higher premiums.
And or what is it that you're not renewed? And apparently that's like blacklisted in the insurance world.
Yeah.
Is that it?
That's bad.
Yeah. Sounds bad.
Yeah.
All right. That's our show for today, folks. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again, John Miller, for being on the podcast again. And I'm sure we'll have you back. Remember, folks, to rate us and get our podcasting app, because we have an app.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget to send all your questions to Donna. She has nothing better to do but answer your questions. So remember, for Donna and John and myself, that HIPAA is not about compliance. It's about patient care.